The thunder crashed across the vast Montana sky as Wyatt Keller watched his cabin's roof leak for the third time that week. April 1876 was turning out to be crueler than the winter that had just passed, the winter that had taken his beloved wife, Margaret, leaving him alone with 3 children he barely knew how to care for. Rain hammered against the wooden walls of the modest homestead he'd built with his own hands 5 years ago, back when hope still coursed through his veins like whiskey on a cold night. The children were huddled together on the single bed in the corner, 10-year-old Thomas clutching his younger sisters, Emma, age 7, and little Rebecca, barely 4. Their hollow eyes reflected the same emptiness Wyatt felt in his chest, a void that grew with each passing day. "Pa, I'm hungry," Emma whispered, her small voice nearly drowned by the tempest outside. Wyatt ran a calloused hand through his dark hair, pushing it back from his weathered face. "I know, darlin'. We'll have something soon." The lie tasted bitter on his tongue. Their supplies had dwindled to nearly nothing, and hunting had been poor. The nearest town, Whispering Pines, was a half-day's ride, and with the storm raging he couldn't leave the children alone. He was a rancher, a horseman, not a father. Margaret had been the heart of their home, the one who knew how to soothe tears and cook meals that made their modest cabin feel like a palace. Without her, he was lost, drowning in responsibilities he'd never prepared for. "Tell us a story, Pa," Thomas requested, his young face already showing signs of the man he would become. The boy had grown solemn since his mother's passing, taking on burdens no child should bear. Wyatt moved to stoke the dying fire, buying himself time. Stories had been Margaret's domain, too. Once there was a sharp knock at the door cut through the drumming rain, startling all of them. Wyatt's hand instinctively moved to the revolver at his hip. Visitors were rare this far from town, especially in weather like this. "Stay put," he instructed the children, moving cautiously toward the door. Another knock, more insistent this time. Wyatt pulled the door open with one hand, the other resting on his Colt. Standing before him, drenched to the bone, was a woman he'd never seen before. Her dark blonde hair was plastered to her face, and her dress, once fine but now mud-splattered, clung to her shivering form. But it was what she held that caught his attention. A cloth-covered basket from which emanated the unmistakable aroma of freshly baked bread. "Mr. Keller?" she asked, her voice clear despite the chattering of her teeth. "I'm Faith Sanders. I've come from town. Reverend Miller sent me to." She stopped, seeming to take in his appearance, the dismal state of the cabin behind him, and the 3 small faces peering from the shadows. "May I come in? I've brought provisions." Something in her direct gaze, devoid of pity but full of purpose, made Wyatt step aside without question. As she crossed the threshold, carrying bread and what looked like hope itself, Wyatt felt the world shift ever so slightly beneath his feet. Faith Sanders moved with purpose, setting her basket on the rough-hewn table before turning to face the children. Her smile was genuine as she crouched down to their level. "Hello there," she said softly. "I've brought some things from town. Are you hungry?" The children stared at her with wide eyes, nodding almost in unison. It had been weeks since they'd seen a woman in their home, and longer still since they'd smelled fresh bread. "I'm Miss Sanders, but you can call me Faith," she continued, pulling back the cloth to reveal not only bread but also a jar of honey, some cheese, and dried beef. "I teach at the schoolhouse in Whispering Pines." Wyatt watched in stunned silence as she efficiently set about preparing a simple meal, moving around his kitchen as if she'd always belonged there. The children gravitated toward her like moths to flame, their initial shyness melting away as she asked them their names and ages. "Why are you here, Miss Sanders?" Wyatt finally asked, finding his voice. The Reverend had no call to send charity our way. Faith straightened, meeting his gaze without flinching. It's not charity, Mr. Keller, it's community. Reverend Miller mentioned your situation, and I volunteered to bring supplies. The storm caught me on the trail. She gestured to her sodden clothes. I'm afraid I've made quite a mess of your floor. Our floor was already a mess, Thomas offered helpfully, earning a rare chuckle from his father. That it was, son, Wyatt agreed, then turned back to Faith. You can't ride back in this weather. You're welcome to stay until it passes. Faith nodded her thanks, and for the first time Wyatt noticed the flecks of gold in her green eyes, the way her face softened when she smiled. Something stirred in him, something he'd thought died alongside Margaret. He pushed it away immediately, feeling the guilt like a physical blow. Papa, Miss Faith says she knows stories, little Rebecca announced, tugging at his pant leg. Real ones about places far away. Is that so? Wyatt raised an eyebrow at their visitor. Faith shrugged modestly as she sliced the bread. I've read many books, and I try to share those stories with my students. She handed a thick slice to each child, watching with satisfaction as they devoured the simple food. Children need stories almost as much as they need bread. As the evening wore on, the storm outside seemed to recede in importance. Faith Sanders, with her quiet efficiency and gentle manner, transformed the dreary cabin. She coaxed smiles from the children, drawing them out with tales of distant lands and magical creatures. Even Wyatt found himself leaning forward, captivated by her melodious voice and the worlds she created with mere words. When the children finally dozed off, their bellies full for the first time in days, Wyatt and Faith sat by the fire, speaking in low tones. "How long has your wife been gone?" she asked directly, but with such compassion that Wyatt found himself answering truthfully. 3 months. Fever took her just as winter set in. He stared into the flames. The children, they need more than I can give them. Faith considered this. They need you, Mr. Keller, and perhaps a little help. She hesitated. I could come by maybe once a week, help with lessons for the children. Bring supplies. Wyatt's pride bristled. We don't need everyone needs help sometimes, she interrupted gently, even the strongest among us. Something in her words broke through his defenses. Maybe it was exhaustion, or the first full meal he'd had in weeks, or simply the sound of another adult's voice in his lonely home. Whatever the reason, Wyatt found himself nodding. The children would like that, he conceded, unwilling to admit that he might like it too. Faith smiled, and in that moment, with the fire casting golden light across her features, Wyatt realized she was beautiful not in the delicate way Margaret had been, but with a strength that seemed to radiate from within. As they prepared for sleep, Wyatt insisting she take his bed while he made do on the floor by the fire, he found himself wondering about this woman who had appeared on his doorstep, like an answer to prayers he hadn't even known how to form. Morning came with clearing skies and a sense of renewal that Wyatt couldn't entirely attribute to the weather. Faith was already up, her hair neatly braided, cooking something that filled the cabin with a mouth-watering aroma. "Good morning, Mr. Keller," she greeted him, her eyes warm. "I hope you don't mind. I found some oats and dried apples." The children were seated at the table, looking more animated than they had in months. Emma was actually giggling at something Faith had said, the sound so unexpected that Wyatt felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Not at all," he managed. "And please call me Wyatt." Faith nodded, a slight flush touching her cheeks. "Wyatt, then." After breakfast, she prepared to leave, packing her few belongings and accepting Wyatt's offer to escort her back to town. "I'll return next Saturday," she promised the children as they clung to her skirts. "And I'll bring more stories. Perhaps you could practice your letters until then. "We will, Miss Faith," Emma vowed solemnly, while Thomas nodded and little Rebecca mimicked her sister's gesture. As Wyatt helped Faith onto his mare, their hands briefly touched, sending an unexpected jolt through him. Their eyes met, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them. "Thank you," he said simply, "for the bread and the hope." Faith's smile was like sunrise breaking over the Montana hills. "Sometimes that's all we need to begin again." As they rode toward Whispering Pines, Wyatt couldn't help but feel that something fundamental had changed in his world. The grief was still there, a constant companion, but alongside it now was a tiny flicker of possibility that hadn't existed before Faith Sanders walked through his door. True to her word, Faith returned the following Saturday, and the Saturday after that. Each visit brought not only provisions but also books, paper, and pencils for the children's lessons. Under her patient guidance, Thomas rediscovered his love of reading. Emma revealed a talent for arithmetic, and even little Rebecca began forming her letters with determined concentration. Wyatt observed these changes with a mixture of gratitude and growing admiration for the schoolteacher who had somehow become an essential part of their lives. She never stayed overnight again after that first stormy encounter, always departing before dusk to return to her small rooms above the general store in town. May bloomed across the countryside, bringing with it renewed life on Wyatt's modest ranch. With Faith's encouragement, he had replanted the vegetable garden Margaret had once tended, and the children delighted in watching the first green shoots push through the soil. On one particularly fine Saturday in late May, Faith arrived with an unexpected proposal. "The town is holding a spring social next weekend," she announced as she helped Emma wash dishes after their midday meal. "There will be music, dancing, and plenty of food. I thought perhaps you might all like to attend." Wyatt, who had been mending a bridle at the table, looked up in surprise. "A social?" "Yes, Wyatt. It's an event where people gather to enjoy each other's company," Faith teased gently. Over the weeks, a comfortable camaraderie had developed between them, with occasional glimpses of something deeper neither was ready to acknowledge. "I know what a social is," he grumbled, though there was no heat in his words. "I just haven't taken the children to town since." He trailed off. "Please, Papa," Emma begged, turning from the wash basin with soapy hands. "Can we go? I want to wear my Sunday dress." "There'll be pie," Faith added with a knowing glance at Thomas, who immediately perked up. The boy had developed a fierce love for Faith's apple pies. Wyatt looked at the hopeful faces of his children, then at Faith's encouraging smile. "I suppose we could make an appearance," he conceded. The children cheered while Faith's expression softened with something that made Wyatt's heart beat a little faster. "Excellent," she said. "Now, Thomas, shall we continue with your history lesson? We were discussing the Louisiana Purchase." As Faith and the children settled at the table with books open before them, Wyatt stepped outside, needing a moment alone. The ranch was starting to look alive again, fences mended, cattle grazing contentedly, the garden promising future harvests. All changes that had begun with Faith's arrival. He leaned against the porch post, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. Margaret would have liked Faith, he realized with a start. The thought came without the crushing guilt that had accompanied any memory of his wife these past months. Margaret had been loving and gentle, the perfect match for the young, idealistic rancher he'd been. But Faith was something else entirely: strong, educated, independent. A woman built for the frontier in ways Margaret had struggled with. The sound of laughter drifted through the open window, Faith's melodious tones mingling with his children's higher voices. Something warm unfurled in Wyatt's chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. The day of the social arrived clear and warm. Wyatt had spent the morning bathing and trimming his beard, uncomfortably aware of how much effort he was putting into his appearance. The children were equally excited, with Emma fussing over her best dress and Thomas attempting to slick down his unruly hair with water. They arrived in Whispering Pines just after noon. The small frontier town was festooned with ribbons and flowers, its main street closed off for dancing. A band was already playing, the cheerful notes of fiddle and banjo filling the air. Wyatt Keller, As I Live and Breathe. Mayor Jenkins approached, hand extended. Good to see you in town, son, and these must be your little ones. My, how they've grown. Wyatt shook the older man's hand, nodding awkwardly. He'd avoided town as much as possible since Margaret's death, sending Thomas with a list when supplies were absolutely necessary. Faith mentioned you might join us today, the mayor continued, his eyes kind. She's been a blessing to this community since she arrived last fall. Turned our schoolhouse around completely. She's been a help to us as well, Wyatt admitted, scanning the crowd for the familiar face he sought. He found Faith surrounded by a group of children, organizing some kind of game involving hoops and sticks. She wore a dress the color of summer sky, her hair loosely pinned up with tendrils escaping around her face. When she caught sight of Wyatt and the children, her entire face lit up, and she excused herself to hurry over. "You came," she exclaimed, her joy so genuine it made Wyatt's chest ache. She crouched down to embrace each child in turn. "Don't you all look wonderful? Thomas, Emma, Rebecca, there are games for children your age just over there. Would you like to join in?" The girls needed no further encouragement, darting off toward the other children. Thomas hesitated, looking to his father for permission. "Go on, son," Wyatt nodded. "Have some fun." As Thomas loped away, Wyatt found himself alone with Faith for the first time in weeks. She smiled up at him, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. "I'm glad you decided to come," she said softly. "The children needed this," he replied, then added more honestly, "We all did." Faith's smile deepened. "Would you care to walk with me? Mrs. Patterson has set up the most magnificent table of pies and cakes." As they strolled through the festive crowd, Wyatt was acutely aware of the glances they attracted. Faith greeted everyone warmly, introducing Wyatt to those he didn't know. He was surprised by how many people expressed genuine concern for his family's well-being. "People have been asking after you," Faith explained as they sampled Mrs. Patterson's famous strawberry pie. "They've wanted to help, but weren't sure how to approach you." Wyatt felt a pang of shame. "I haven't made it easy, have I?" Faith touched his arm lightly. "Grief rarely makes things easy, Wyatt." The simple understanding in her words loosened something within him. As the afternoon wore on, Wyatt found himself relaxing, even joining in conversation with men he'd once considered friends. The children played until their cheeks were flushed with exertion and happiness, returning occasionally for food or to show their father some treasure they'd discovered. As dusk approached, lanterns were lit, and the band struck up a waltz. Couples moved onto the makeshift dance floor, their figures casting long shadows in the golden light. "Would you care to dance, Miss Sanders?" The question came from Harold Fletcher, the bank manager's son, a handsome young man in his 20s who had been hovering near Faith throughout the afternoon. Something uncomfortable twisted in Wyatt's gut as he waited for Faith's response. She hesitated, glancing briefly at Wyatt before smiling politely at Harold. "Thank you, Mr. Fletcher, but I promise to help Mrs. Miller serve the punch. Perhaps another time." As Harold walked away, visibly disappointed, Faith turned to Wyatt with a slight shrug. "I really did promise to help." "You don't need to explain," Wyatt said quickly, though relief coursed through him. "I should check on the children anyway." They parted ways, and Wyatt found the children among a group playing a game of tag at the edge of the gathering. Rebecca ran to him immediately, arms raised to be lifted. "Are you having a good time, little one?" he asked, settling her on his hip. She nodded emphatically. "Miss Faith said there's to be fireworks later. Can we stay to see them, Papa, please?" Wyatt looked at his youngest daughter's pleading face and found he couldn't deny her. "I suppose we could." As night fully descended, the crowd gathered at the edge of town where the fireworks would be set off. Wyatt found himself standing beside Faith once more, with Rebecca asleep against his shoulder and Thomas and Emma sitting on a blanket at their feet. "It's been a wonderful day," Faith said quietly. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for inviting us," Wyatt responded. In the darkness, he felt bold enough to add, "You've brought something back to us, Faith, something I thought was gone forever." She turned to look at him, her face illuminated by the distant lanterns. "And what might that be?" The first firework exploded overhead before he could answer, a burst of red and gold that drew gasps from the crowd. The children's faces turned upward in wonder as more colorful explosions followed. In that moment of distraction, Wyatt found Faith's hand with his free one and gently squeezed it. To his surprise and joy, she didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers intertwined with his as they stood together, watching the night sky bloom with light. The journey home was quiet, with all three children asleep in the wagon. Faith had accepted Wyatt's offer of a ride back to the ranch, from where she would return to town the following day. The evening had shifted something between them, though neither had put it into words. As they approached the darkened cabin, Wyatt glanced at Faith's profile silvered by moonlight. "I never answered your question earlier." "Which one?" she asked, her voice soft to avoid waking the children. "About what you brought back to us." He guided the horses to a stop before the cabin. "It was joy, Faith, plain and simple joy." In the quiet that followed, the night seemed to hold its breath. Then Faith reached out, her hand gentle against his cheek. "Joy isn't a thing that comes from outside us, Wyatt. It was always there, waiting for you to be ready to feel it again." He covered her hand with his own, turning his face slightly to press a kiss against her palm. The gesture was spontaneous, born of emotion he could no longer contain. Faith's sharp intake of breath made him pull back, afraid he'd overstepped. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have known," she interrupted, her voice trembling slightly. "Don't apologize, please." Their eyes met in the darkness, and Wyatt saw his own longing reflected in her gaze. Slowly, giving her every chance to retreat, he leaned forward until his lips brushed against hers in the gentlest of kisses. Faith responded with a sigh, her hand moving to the nape of his neck as the kiss deepened. It was tender and hesitant, a beginning rather than a culmination. When they parted, both were breathing unsteadily. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," Wyatt admitted. Faith smiled, touching her fingers to her lips. "As have I." The moment was broken by Thomas stirring in the back of the wagon. Wyatt reluctantly pulled away, reality reasserting itself. "I should get the children to bed." Together, they carried the sleeping children into the cabin. As Wyatt tucked Rebecca into her small bed, he watched Faith gently removing Emma's shoes. There was something so right about her presence in his home, as if she filled a space that had been waiting for her all along. Later, as they sat before the fire with cups of coffee, a comfortable silence between them, Wyatt found the courage to speak of things he'd kept bottled inside for too long. "After Margaret died, I was angry, at God, at the world, even at her for leaving us." He stared into the flames. "The children deserved better than what I could give them. I knew it, but I didn't know how to change." Faith listened without interruption, her eyes compassionate. "Then you arrived," he continued, meeting her gaze. "And suddenly there was color again where everything had been gray, The children smiled. The house felt like a home. He took a deep breath. I care for you, Faith, more than I thought possible. But I need you to understand Margaret will always be part of me, part of our family. Faith set down her cup and took his hand. I would never ask you to forget her, Wyatt. Love isn't diminished by being shared, it only grows. She hesitated, then added softly, I care for you too. And for your children. These past weeks they've meant everything to me. Wyatt brought her hand to his lips. Where do we go from here? Faith's smile held both certainty and patience. Forward, Wyatt, one day at a time. As summer bloomed across the Montana territory, Faith became an ever more integral part of the Keller family's life. She still taught at the schoolhouse in Whispering Pines, but she spent every weekend at the ranch, gradually bringing order and warmth back to the home that had stood half abandoned in grief. The children flourished under her attention. Thomas, once withdrawn and solemn, rediscovered his natural curiosity. Emma's sweet nature emerged from behind the shell of sadness she'd built, while Rebecca, too young to fully understand her mother's absence, simply basked in Faith's affection. Wyatt found himself changing too. The weight of sorrow still visited him, especially in quiet moments when memories of Margaret surfaced unexpectedly. But increasingly, those memories brought bittersweet comfort rather than crushing pain. And Faith, with her remarkable empathy, seemed to know exactly when to offer comfort and when to give him space. Their courtship unfolded slowly, respectfully. Stolen kisses when the children weren't looking. Conversations that stretched long into the night after the little ones were asleep. Gradually, the people of Whispering Pines came to see them as a couple, nodding approvingly when they attended church together, the three children between them. By mid-July, Wyatt knew with certainty that he wanted Faith in his life permanently. But asking her to marry him meant confronting questions he'd been avoiding about their future, about whether she was truly ready to become a mother to three children who had already lost so much. The opportunity arose unexpectedly one evening as they walked along the creek that bordered his property. The children were back at the cabin, Thomas having proudly assumed responsibility for his sisters, while the adults took a rare moment alone. The setting sun painted the landscape in hues of gold and amber, the air sweet with wildflowers and the promise of rain. Faith's hand was warm in his as they strolled in comfortable silence. I received a letter from the school board yesterday, Faith said suddenly, stopping to face him. They've offered to renew my contract for the coming year. Wyatt felt a chill despite the summer warmth. And will you accept? Faith studied his face, her expression serious. That depends. On what? On what kind of future we might build together. Her directness, always one of the qualities he most admired, left no room for evasion. Wyatt took both her hands in his. Faith Sanders, from the moment you walked into our lives carrying bread and hope, you've been a blessing I never expected and certainly didn't deserve. He swallowed hard, emotion making his voice rough. I love you. The children love you. I believe Margaret sent you to us in her way. Faith's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I'm asking if you would consider becoming my wife, he continued. A mother to my children. A partner in whatever life brings our way. For a long moment Faith was silent and Wyatt felt fear grip his heart. Then she raised her hand to cup his cheek, her touch infinitely tender. I've been waiting for you to ask, she whispered. Yes, Wyatt, yes to all of it. The kiss they shared sealed promises neither needed to voice aloud. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and wiping away tears, the first stars were appearing in the deepening blue of the sky. When? Wyatt asked simply. Faith considered. August, before the new school term begins. A small ceremony, here at the ranch perhaps? Wyatt nodded, already imagining Faith in a bride's dress, standing beneath the old oak tree where he and Margaret had once picnicked in happier days. Somehow, the thought brought peace rather than pain. "The children will be overjoyed," he said. "They've been dropping hints for weeks. Even Rebecca asked if you could be their new mama." Faith's smile was radiant. "I would be honored. They are remarkable children, Wyatt, a testament to both you and Margaret." As they walked back to the cabin hand in hand, plans and possibilities unfurling between them, Wyatt felt a sense of rightness that had been absent for too long. The ranch was thriving again, the cattle fat on summer grass, the garden yielding vegetables in abundance. And soon, Faith would be his wife, completing the circle of healing that had begun that stormy April evening. News of their engagement spread quickly through Whispering Pines. The townsfolk, who had watched Wyatt's struggle and Faith's patient devotion, responded with genuine happiness. Wedding gifts began appearing at the schoolhouse, handcrafted items, preserves, offers of help with the ceremony. The children's reaction, when Wyatt and Faith told them together, was everything they'd hoped for. Emma and Rebecca squealed with delight, while Thomas, ever more serious, had simply nodded and said, "I knew it. You look at Miss Faith the way the heroes look at the heroines in the books she reads us." Faith's cheeks had colored at that, but her smile was radiant as she assured the children that becoming their stepmother would be the greatest joy of her life. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a flurry of preparations. Faith moved her belongings to the ranch in stages, transforming the cabin with small touches that somehow honored Margaret's memory while establishing her own presence. A quilt here, new curtains there, books filling the shelves Wyatt built at her request. They decided to marry on the third Saturday in August, beneath the spreading branches of the oak tree that stood sentinel over the ranch. Reverend Miller would perform the ceremony, and afterward, there would be a celebration with food and music and dancing under the stars. As the day approached, Wyatt found himself increasingly reflective. One evening, after the children were asleep, he showed Faith a small wooden box he kept on the highest shelf in his bedroom. "These were Margaret's," he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold band and a cameo brooch. "I'd like you to have them if you're willing." Faith touched the items reverently. "Are you certain?" Wyatt nodded. "Margaret would want you to have them. She wasn't one for jealousy or pettiness. She would be grateful that her children have found love again. That I have." Faith carefully closed the box and placed it on the table before taking Wyatt's hands. "I'll treasure them and her memory, and I'll do my best every day to be worthy of the family she created." The morning of the wedding dawned clear and perfect, as if nature itself blessed their union. Faith prepared in the small room that had once been Margaret's sewing space, helped by Emma and Rebecca, who took their duties as flower girls with utmost seriousness. Her dress was simple but beautiful, ivory lace over satin that Mrs. Patterson from town had helped her alter from her mother's wedding gown. Her hair was pinned up with sprigs of wildflowers, and at her throat lay Margaret's cameo. When she emerged from the cabin to where Wyatt waited beneath the oak, a hush fell over the gathered guests. Wyatt, handsome in his best suit with Thomas standing proudly at his side as best man, watched her approach with such naked adoration that Faith felt tears threaten. The ceremony itself was brief, but meaningful. Reverend Miller spoke of second chances and God's grace, of families bound by love rather than merely blood. When Wyatt slipped Margaret's wedding band onto Faith's finger, his hands trembled slightly, but his voice was clear and strong as he recited his vows. "I, Wyatt James Keller, take you, Faith Elizabeth Sanders, to be my lawfully wedded wife. To have and to hold from this day forward for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Faith's response was equally firm, her green eyes never leaving his as she promised herself to him and his children for all their days to come. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Miller announced, and as Wyatt drew Faith into his arms, the assembled guests erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration that followed was everything they'd hoped for: joyful, intimate, a true community gathering. Tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by neighbors. The band from town played tunes both lively and sweet. Children played tag between the dancers, their laughter a counterpoint to the music. As evening descended and lanterns were lit around the ranch yard, Wyatt led Faith onto the makeshift dance floor for a waltz. She moved into his arms naturally, as if she'd always belonged there. "Happy, Mrs. Keller," he murmured against her ear. Faith's smile was luminous. "More than I ever imagined possible." They swayed together beneath the star-studded Montana sky, surrounded by friends and family, the future stretching before them bright with promise. Later, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Wyatt and Faith stood on the porch of what was now truly their home. His arm around her waist, her head resting against his shoulder, they gazed at the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss months earlier. "When you walked through our door that rainy night," Wyatt said softly, "I was a man drowning in grief and responsibility. You saved us, Faith." She turned in his arms, her expression serious in the moonlight. "No, my love, you were already saving yourself and your children. I just helped light the way." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, a husband's kiss rather than a suitor's. And as Faith responded with equal passion, Wyatt knew that the journey that had begun in loss and loneliness had led them exactly where they were meant to be together, creating a new family from the foundations of the old. The years that followed their wedding brought changes both expected and surprising to the Keller family. Faith continued teaching at the schoolhouse in Whispering Pines, riding to town each morning and returning each afternoon, except in the harshest weather when she would stay in her old rooms above the general store. Wyatt's ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Faith's practical education complemented his hard-earned knowledge of the land, and together they expanded their cattle herd and improved their crops. The children thrived, growing in confidence and ability under Faith's gentle guidance and their father's steadfast love. When winter arrived that first year of their marriage, it brought not the devastating grief of the previous season but a quiet contentment as the family gathered around the hearth each evening. Faith reading aloud while Wyatt carved wooden animals for the children, Thomas helping Rebecca with her letters while Emma worked on the sampler Faith had taught her to stitch. Spring 1877 brought news that filled the cabin with fresh joy. Faith was expecting a child. The announcement was met with excitement from Emma and Rebecca, though Thomas showed characteristic thoughtfulness. "Will the baby know about our first mother?" he asked one evening as Wyatt tucked him into bed. Wyatt sat on the edge of the boy's bed, considering his son's serious face. "Yes, Thomas, your mother will always be part of our family's story. This baby will know about the brave, kind woman who gave me 3 wonderful children before God called her home." Thomas nodded, satisfied. "Faith says that families can have lots of different shapes, but they're all real if the love is real." "Faith is a wise woman," Wyatt agreed, his chest tight with emotion. "That's why I married her." "That and because she's pretty," Thomas added with sudden mischief, a glimpse of the carefree boy he was slowly becoming again. Wyatt chuckled and ruffled his son's hair. "That too, son, that too." As Faith's pregnancy progressed, she reluctantly reduced her teaching schedule, eventually taking a leave of absence for the final months. The time at home allowed her to prepare not only for the baby, but also for the changes it would bring to their family dynamic. "I want you all to know," she told the children during one of their nightly story times, her hand resting on her growing belly, "that having this baby doesn't mean I'll love you any less. My heart has plenty of room for all of you." "We know that, Mama Faith," Emma said, using the name she and Rebecca had adopted soon after the wedding. Thomas still called her Faith, which she respected as his choice. "Just like you tell us about having two mothers, one in heaven and one here, we can have lots of brothers and sisters too." Faith's eyes met Wyatt's over the children's heads, both of them moved by the simple wisdom of Emma's words. In late November, as the first snows dusted the Montana mountains, Faith gave birth to a healthy son they named James Robert Keller. The delivery was long and difficult, with the nearest doctor unable to reach them through a sudden blizzard. Mrs. Patterson, who had assisted at many births in the community, took charge. While Wyatt paced outside the bedroom door, the children huddled anxiously in the main room of the cabin. When at last the baby's cry pierced the tense silence, a collective sigh of relief filled the home. Mrs. Patterson emerged, tired but smiling, to announce that mother and child were doing well. Wyatt entered the bedroom to find Faith pale but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "Meet your son, Mr. Keller," she whispered as he knelt beside the bed. Wyatt's hand trembled as he touched the baby's downy head. "He's perfect," he managed, voice thick with emotion. "Would you like to hold him while I rest a bit?" Faith asked, her exhaustion evident despite her joy. As Wyatt cradled his newborn son, marveling at the tiny fingers and perfect features, the bedroom door creaked open to reveal three anxious faces peering in. "Come meet your brother," he invited softly, and the children approached the bed with unusual solemnity. "He's so small," Rebecca breathed, wide-eyed. "You were smaller," Thomas informed her with the authority of his 11 years. "I remember." "Can I touch him?" Emma asked, looking to Faith for permission. Faith nodded, her smile tired but genuine. "Gently, sweetheart, he's very new." As the family gathered around the bed, united in wonder at this new life that had joined them, Wyatt felt a profound sense of completion. The circle that had been broken by Margaret's death had reformed, different but whole, strengthened by the love that had brought Faith to them that stormy April evening. The years continued to unspool, marked by the milestones that shape all families' first steps and lost teeth, school achievements and childhood illnesses, moments of conflict and reconciliation. Through it all, Faith and Wyatt's partnership deepened, their love weathering the challenges of frontier life with resilience and grace. Thomas, at 16, showed promise as a rancher, working alongside his father with increasing skill and confidence. Emma developed Faith's love of books and learning, often assisting with the younger children's lessons. Rebecca, her mother's artistic temperament evident in her drawings and handcrafts, became Faith's shadow in the kitchen and garden. Little James, or Jamie as he was affectionately known, grew into a sturdy toddler with Wyatt's dark hair and Faith's laughing green eyes. And in the spring of 1880, the family welcomed another child, a daughter named Sarah Grace, whose arrival was considerably less dramatic than her brother's, born with the assistance of the doctor, who had established a proper practice in the growing town of Whispering Pines. By 1882, the original cabin had been expanded twice to accommodate the growing family. Wyatt and Faith's bedroom now occupied one end of the structure, with rooms for the boys and girls respectively. The main living area had been enlarged, with Faith's prized possession, a small piano purchased after a particularly profitable cattle sale, taking pride of place near the hearth. The ranch itself had grown as well. Additional pastures were fenced for the expanding herd, A proper barn replaced the original stable, and a bunkhouse was added for the two hands Wyatt now employed during the busier seasons. Through all these changes, one constant remained: the story of how their family had been forged. Each April, on the anniversary of Faith's arrival, the family would share a special meal featuring freshly baked bread, and Wyatt would retell the tale of the stormy night when a schoolteacher had appeared on their doorstep, carrying provisions and possibility. "Did you know right away that you would marry Papa?" Sarah Grace asked on one such evening, her 6-year-old curiosity insatiable. Faith exchanged a smile with Wyatt across the table. "Not right away, no. But I knew there was something special about this family from the first moment I saw you all." "Papa says you brought hope when we needed it most," Thomas added. At 20, he was a man now, tall and steady like his father, but with a scholarly bent that Faith had nurtured over the years. "Hope is a powerful thing," Faith agreed, but it was already here, waiting to be rekindled. "Sometimes we all need someone to remind us of what matters most." "And bread," Rebecca interjected with a grin. "Don't forget the bread. I remember being so hungry that night." Laughter rippled around the table, the shared memory binding them together in ways that transcended blood and birth. Later that evening, with the younger children asleep and Thomas out checking the livestock one last time, Wyatt and Faith sat on the porch swing he'd built for her 40th birthday. The Montana twilight stretched long and lovely before them, the distant mountains purple against the fading sky. 12 years, Wyatt mused, his arm around his wife's shoulders. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and other times I can hardly remember what life was like before you." Faith leaned into his embrace, her head fitting perfectly beneath his chin as it always had. "I was so nervous that day, riding out here in the rain. Reverend Miller had told me about the widower with 3 children who wouldn't accept help, and I was determined to be the one who got through to you." "You were rather formidable," Wyatt chuckled. "Standing there dripping on my doorstep, demanding entry." "I did not demand," Faith protested, pinching his side playfully. "I was the very picture of genteel persuasion. Is that what they're calling it these days?" He caught her hand and brought it to his lips, a gesture that had become familiar over their years together, yet still made Faith's heart quicken. "Whatever you call it, I'm grateful every day that you persisted." Faith turned to face him, the laugh lines around her eyes and mouth only enhancing her beauty in Wyatt's view. "As am I, my love. As am I." They sat in comfortable silence for a time, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue above. From inside, they could hear Emma playing softly on the piano, a lullaby for the youngest children. The scent of Faith's bread lingered in the evening air, mingling with the earthy smells of the ranch hay and horses, leather and pine. "Do you ever wonder," Faith asked suddenly, "what would have happened if I hadn't come that day? If I'd waited for the storm to pass or sent someone else with the supplies?" Wyatt considered the question seriously, as he did all things. "I believe we would have found each other somehow," he said finally. "Some connections are meant to be, ordained by something greater than ourselves." Faith smiled, touched by his certainty. "The incurable romantic beneath that rugged exterior. That's why I married you, you know." "Here I thought it was for my vast ranch and fortune," he teased back, gesturing to their modest homestead. "Oh, absolutely. The wealth and glamour of frontier ranching was irresistible to this schoolteacher." Faith's laughter mingled with his, the sound drifting out across the land they both loved. As night settled fully around them, Wyatt rose and offered his hand to his wife. "Shall we go in, Mrs. Keller?" Faith placed her hand in his, as she had countless times before and would countless times again. "Lead the way, Mr. Keller." Together they entered the warm light of their home, the home they had built from grief and hope, from chance meetings and deliberate choices, from the simple miracle of a woman who had once walked through a storm carrying bread and the promise of better days to come. And in the years that followed, as their children grew and eventually established homes and families of their own, as the ranch prospered and the community around them flourished, Wyatt and Faith Keller remained each other's truest companions. Their love story, born in the aftermath of loss, became a testament to the resilience of the human heart and the unexpected paths that lead us home. When Thomas married Anna Miller, the Reverend's daughter, in 1885, the ceremony took place beneath the same oak tree where Wyatt and Faith had exchanged their vows. Emma followed in 1888, wedding Michael Fletcher, the banker's son who had once asked Faith to dance. Rebecca chose a traveling journalist who had stopped in Whispering Pines to document the changing frontier, the two of them eventually settling in Denver, but returning often with their children. Jamie grew into a thoughtful young man who combined his father's practicality with his mother's love of learning, eventually taking over management of the ranch's expanding operations. Sarah Grace, to everyone's surprise including her own, discovered a talent for medicine while assisting the town doctor during an influenza outbreak, and became one of Montana's first female physicians. Through it all, the story of the cowboy who stood alone with 3 children until a schoolteacher walked in carrying bread and hope remained a family touchstone, passed down to grandchildren and great-grandchildren as proof that even in the darkest moments, love finds a way to light our path forward. And when visitors to the prosperous Keller Ranch would remark on the obvious devotion between the silver-haired rancher and his still-spirited wife, Wyatt would simply smile and say, "She saved us all, you know. One loaf of bread at a time." To which Faith would invariably respond, with the wisdom of their years together, "We saved each other. That's what love does when you give it room to grow."